it's amazing that you've managed to stay here so long, and well done, and long may it continue. I think to all members of this place, I want to make a few comments. I want to talk about what a unique opportunity this is, and it's not the opportunity to just to get here and to have your 15 minutes of fame. It's actually the opportunity to drive change, and it's so exciting. And I think, as well as an opportunity, it's actually a responsibility. Now, I do want to finish up by talking about some of the changes that I've been able to help, and in some cases to drive. And before I do, I want to make this qualifier. Look, if my time here in this chamber and in politics has taught me one thing, this is not a place for false modesty. So I say that in prelude to my I can promise you I'm not about to deliver false modesty. Look, unquestionably I get recognition for the issue of ADHD advocacy, and particularly the story in Western Australia, and I'm going to talk about that later. But I do want to claim a few other successes, some of which might be contested by others. The first success I want to claim is the reform of the committee system. The member for Kalgoorlie actually acknowledged this when we made this decision. That is the idea that we have opposition chairs of committees. I spotted that opportunity after the last state election, went and negotiated with the member for Alfred Cove, the member for Kalgoorlie, and tried to set up a little bit of a forerunner to those changes. And the member for Kalgoorlie gave me some credit for that, so I'm thankful for that credit. I also want to claim some credit for the voluntary student unionism response that Labor instigated in government. In fact, I have to share the credit because it was Paul Andrews and I were sitting around chewing the fat in our office when we shared an office. I think this was when we were talking after Southern River had been sorted out. And Paul and I came up with the idea that the model that was actually incorporated in, I think, 2004, 2005 from memory. I also want to take some, say I had a role in the response that the government to the OBE debacle when we actually started to turn that around. I'd actually been having meetings with Greg Williams from Plato. Greg Williams, I thought, was a fantastic and passionate educator who had some very real issues, and I had a series of meetings, about half a dozen meetings with Greg in my lounge room over a number of months as we tried to sort of nut out the problems and steer a pathway forward. And Alan Carpenter actually worked with me to discuss some of those issues and take on board some of the concerns that Greg Williams had, the very real concerns. I won't talk about them in great detail, but the men at Whitby Falls, I thought what was happening to those was appalling at the time. So those that were members of the caucus at the time, I would say to you, no matter whatever power somebody has within caucus or within the Labor Party, when they're doing the wrong thing, it's your duty to stand them up. And I stood up a particular individual. I have no prizes for guessing who on that issue. And those men weren't, at 48 years of age, cast into old people's homes, for want of a better term. I also had a leading role in the Education and Health Standing Committee that was the instigator, the catalyst of the response, and I thank the Deputy Premier for acknowledging that. That led to an increase in speech therapy services. We also had, and Linda and Anne and Patrick and Sorman and others have all helped out on this. We had a whole host of multitude of electoral issues where we had people coming into our electoral office, and they can take credit for the work that was done with those. Some unfinished business that I'd like the Parliament to consider. The issue of organ donation. I did introduce some legislation to this Parliament. The Minister for Health has said that he actually supports the legislation in principle but can achieve the same thing through regulation, and has told me on a number of occasions that he will be regulating to bring into effect the outcomes of that legislation. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet. I notice he's left the chamber, but I hope he takes the time that's left to do that. I also brought in some legislation about the removal of the damage to reputation provisions that can see people made involuntary patients. Again, that hasn't got support. I was hopeful at one stage that the National Party were going to support me, and they were making some noises in that regard, but fell in line with their coalition buddies. But I do understand that the legislation that will not be decided in this Parliament will have the same effect, and I'll be watching that with close eyes when I leave the Parliament. Other issues, the issue of prescription drug abuse, a huge issue that has largely the responsibility of the federal government. but there is a role for state government in that as well, and I leave that as unfinished business. And the last piece of unfinished business I want to talk about is the family of Claire Murray. That family has been through the ringer, and they suffered some outrageous criticisms during the time of Claire's illness, and even after her death. They are left with a significant debt, and without telling the whole story now, and one day the whole story will come out, can I just, those that are in the know, just wipe that debt. Just wipe that debt. That family has been through a hell of a lot and deserve to have that debt written. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a speech by the member for Bassendean or the member for Roleystone if I didn't talk about ADHD. And I guess the obvious question is, why did I concentrate on that particular issue so much? And there were two reasons that I did. The first was because I could, and it mattered, and no one else was going to do it. And the second reason was I actually managed, by a fortuitous series of events, to end up in a safe seat with no promotional prospects. So I had lots of time. I could do something constructive, and I'm glad I had that time because it allowed me to really turn my mind to that issue. And it is an important issue, and I am proud of what we've managed to achieve there, and it is a unique story in Western Australia. Western Australia is the world's only child drugging hotspot to have seen a massive decline in child prescribing rates. About 50% decline in child prescribing rates between 2002, 2003 and 2010. And allied to that, a 51% decline in the rates of amphetamine abuse amongst teenagers. Now, I think there's a nexus there. I think the nexus is, if you stop giving kids amphetamines, guess what? They stop abusing them. I don't think it's much more complex than that. And we did that, and I have to credit Bob Kachira, who, as the Minister for Health, who was really supportive of the initiatives that I put in place there. And thank God we did it while Bob was the Health Minister and not his successor, because I didn't get the same level of cooperation there. So we did amazing things there, and I'm very pleased with the role I played in it. And I thank Bob for his role in that. The other things we did were the clinic at Murdoch, that's been established in the term of, that was committed in the term of our government, in the last term of government, and was actually rolled out by this government, the Complex Attentional Behaviours Clinic at Murdoch. And the third thing that came out of the West Australian story was the RAIN study, which I haven't got time to discuss in detail here, but if members are interested, I'm sure you can review some of my other speeches or those many long blogs that I've sent you over the years. The RAIN study is unique West Australian research. It's come out of the RAIN study data that started in 1989, and it actually shows that if you actually medicate kids for a long period of time, the prospects, those kids with ADHD, the prospects of those kids with ADHD of educational achievement are much worse if they're medicated than they're unmedicated. Very significant research, and that came out of that whole process that was driven by myself and Bob Kachira when we tightened up accountability measures, but also instigated a parliamentary inquiry into ADHD in 2004. At a national level, I've had an effect in that area. The national guidelines for ADHD were, it's fair to say, they were put, the NHMRC delegated to the Royal Australian College of Physicians, who delegated them to a series of people who had significant connections to the pharmaceutical industry, and guess what? They came up with pro-pharmaceutical industry recommendations, and through a series of exposés, and I was fortunate enough to have some good contacts in the Australian newspaper and the News Limited papers, which is quite rare for a Labor member of Parliament. We managed to put some pressure on the federal government, and to the great credit of Mark Butler, he actually abandoned that process, started a new process, the draft clinical practice points process, which was basically a contested process where you had people that believed, as I do, about ADHD, and you had people on the other side of the argument. They got together, they bashed their heads together, and they came up with some sort of compromise outcome. Now, it's not what I would like, it certainly is still, in my view, too pro-medication, but nonetheless a much better outcome, and Mark Butler does deserve some credit for that. Now, You would have heard me speak about this at length, and sometimes the speeches I've made have been incredibly detailed and complex on the issue. And you can go into levels of complexity around the issue, and the things like the study that came out of Canada that showed that children born in this was a study of 938,000 children, that showed that children born in the last months of the school year were about 50% more likely to be diagnosed and medicated for ADHD than children born in the first month of the school year. For obvious reasons, their relative levels of maturity. They were less mature, so therefore they were diagnosed as being hyperactive and inattentive when really they were just younger. I could talk about the RAIN study at length, and I won't. I could talk about the genetic basis, studies, some of the bogus work that's been done around the genetic basis of ADHD, but I won't. But I will just boil it down to this, if you had to simplify my position, and that is, it's a very simple position. ADHD is a disorder that's diagnosed for a whole series of behavioural checklists. Things like losing your toys and pencils, fidgeting in your seat, being easily distracted, being forgetful, talking too much, not playing quietly. They're all normal childhood behaviours, so that's one of my problems. But if I even had to simplify it further, the drugs used to treat ADHD are primarily amphetamines. They're either dexamphetamine, which is an amphetamine, or Ritalin, which is which is called methylphenidate. That's the chemical name, which is classed as a neuroamphetamine. Or in the States, they actually use methamphetamine, a drug called desoxin, to diagnose it. Now, what's my simple position? My simple position is this: amphetamines are not good for children. Okay, so if we had to simplify it any further than that, if I leave you with, this will probably be the last speech anybody makes reference to ADHD for quite a while. It is still an issue in Western Australia. There are still 6,000 children on ADHD drugs. Thankfully, it's 11% below the national average. We do have a huge hangover problem with an amphetamine culture, an amphetamine abuse culture, and a dexamphetamine diversion culture amongst adults. Adults in Western Australia are 3.3 times more likely to be medicated, to receive a pharmaceutical benefit scheme sponsored script of amphetamines, prescription amphetamines, than people in the rest of Australia. So we do have a huge hangover problem, but thankfully the numbers have come down. Now, that story in Western Australia is a unique story, and I've learned lots of lessons. And people have said to me, why are you leaving politics? Well, I'm actually not leaving politics. I have no intention to leave politics. I have become interested in an area of politics that's narrowed. I mean, politics is a game for generalists. I've become interested in the politics of mental health, and I think some of the lessons that I've learned about patterns of behaviour that we use to promote that disorder and sell those drugs are equally applicable across other things. I mean, there are bogus new disorders being proposed. The one that we need to keep our eyes on, and I might gear up the member for Warnbro because he seems to be attuned to these things, is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, which is where they're turning toddler tantrums into a mental illness. Even real mental illness, things like depression, anxiety and psychosis, real mental illness that often benefit from the use of medications, is being oversold. It's being oversold to us. The benefits of the drugs are exaggerated and the risks are understated. And we are really, in Australia, on a dangerous pathway. We're on a dangerous pathway. We are following that American model where, in America, 1 in 5 adults, and I think it's 27% of American women, are on some form of mental health drug. Now, mental health issues or mental illness is common, but it ain't that common. It ain't that common. And I'm going to use what skills I've learnt to try and fight that fight. Unfortunately, there's been a patient fight back in recent years. There's a move towards the recovery movement, and it's something I intend to throw my whole energies behind. Look, I've run out of time. It is an amazing opportunity to be a member of this place. It has been a joy for most of the time. It has been a challenge at others, but it is an incredible privilege and an incredible opportunity, an opportunity to drive change and an obligation to drive change. For those of you that are going forward, good luck with it. Be brave and you know, speed to all of you. Thank you.
Leader of the House.